Welcome to the lesson on Salamis. Sorry, usual cat issues. So this is probably the centerpiece of Aeschylus's Persians. It's certainly, one could argue, the centerpiece of Herodotus too. So the depiction of Salamis is a crucial thing to get to know, especially because Herodotus and Aeschylus both describe the same battle in kind of intimate detail. So exploring where there may be differences is quite an interesting idea, because it does help you understand the, in some ways, different and similar purposes of both Aeschylus and Herodotus. So just a quick review, thinking back to Atossa. How do the following ideas characterize, or following events rather, characterize Atossa? So her dream and her portent, her arrival in the chariot, and her interactions with the chorus. So see if you can come up with a couple of points for those. And then I'd like you to think about how similar is Atossa to Amazon queens, and jot down a couple of sentences on who would the Greeks have hated most and why out of Atossa or Amazon queens such as Penthesilea or Hippolyta. So that should take you about 10 minutes by the time you have done that. Stop the video and crack on. So just a quick reminder. So her dream and the portent again show that Persians don't really understand the will of the gods, the divine. The dream is quite interesting because it really helps kind of characterize Xerxes, and perhaps the fact that Atossa doesn't understand some really clear symbols. I don't think it makes her an idiot. I think it makes her a bit Persian and a bit unaware, and perhaps it's something to do with her status as a woman. Does she have that kind of male ability to rationalize from a Greek perspective? I don't know. You do have female priestesses and so on and so forth. So I think it generally contributes to this idea of of Persians not understanding quite clear messages from the gods. And the same could be said with the eagle and the falcon portent. She sees the portent. We've literally just had this discussion about where the large army is, and she doesn't get what's going on. So the arrival in the chariot is again an extremely important characterization, because it shows the sort of political and social status of Atossa, that focus on luxury and her dominance over the men of Persia. In fact, there's only one man who she doesn't dominate, and that is her son. Well, to Darius as well, but does he count as he's dead? In her interactions with the chorus, it's quite interesting. She does give them instructions. She does tell them what to do. Listen to my dream. She does ask them for advice, but it's interesting that no one really has a clue what to do. So Atossa's certainly seemingly in charge or respected, but fundamentally no one knows how to really truly interpret these dreams. No one knows what to do next in terms of where to find out what the army's doing or what's going on. Or there's this state of kind of confusion and ignorance among both the Persians and Atossa, and that's really highlighted by her interactions. Again, she refines some kind of key Persian ideas. Sort of absolutely crucial go-to quote is that no man can hold him accountable, when she's talking about Xerxes. Basically, whatever happens, Xerxes is right. We don't have any kind of silly notions like states or accountability. It's all about the rule of one man. Obviously, she refers to rich and golden houses and things like that. So again, this Persian obsession and focus on wealth and luxury. So moving on, how similar is Atossa to Amazon queens? Well, I think you can argue all sorts of different directions, but I think these would be some areas to consider. So political power, Hippolyta and Penthesilea have great political power. They run the Amazons. They're in control of the Amazons. Atossa has very significant political power. She's not quite the head of the state, if you like. She is sort of in control, but not really. And I think this is one of the problems with the Persian political system. When the king is away, there's almost no one in control. She does have political power, but it's a bit weak and it's a bit nebulous, and everyone is really waiting for the king to come back and tell them what to do. Obviously, from an Athenian perspective, even that would be far too much political power, wandering around telling men what to do. In terms of military threat or physical threat, there's a little bit of a difference here in some ways. So Atossa doesn't really present any kind of physical threat, although as a member of the Persian royal family, she sort of is part of that kind of group that has sort of invaded Greece. But I think as an individual, I think she's a little bit more feminine in a sort of traditional Greek sense. She's not warlike. She doesn't contribute to any military discussions. She doesn't make any military decisions. So in some ways, perhaps she is a much more traditional female. And then that contrast with the Amazons, so Penthesilea and Hippolyta, who are fighting men on the battlefield, and they defeat men. And it only really takes a great hero, Achilles, to defeat militarily and physically the Amazon queen. So I think they represent a very different threat in that sense. Hippolyta also, according to variations of the myth, leads a military invasion of Athens. In terms of dangerous sexual allure, so sex and sexuality and a kind of that almost corruption of Athenian men with open sexuality, I think probably it seems as though Penthesilea and Hippolyta are much more desirable. I don't know if we ever really understand the nature of Atossa's beauty. I don't think she's necessarily openly sexual in the same way as some of the Amazons are, as depicted in Herodotus and on pottery. They're sort of nude or wearing revealing clothing. We don't seem to get that same sense from Atossa, and actually in some ways she's quite a good wife. And bear in mind, she is relatively old. She's the wife of Darius, so she's certainly an older woman. And the Greeks wouldn't really have expected older women to display or be engaged in any sort of real kind of transmission of sexuality. Oh, transmission of sexuality sounds like a dodgy word, doesn't it? So perhaps that's more a function of age rather than her inherent character, but I don't know. I think there is obviously something more powerfully sexual about the Amazons. Divine connections. I think this is where we've got potentially a big difference. The Amazons, as weird and exotic as they are, do seem to be connected to the gods. Obviously, they're direct descendants of Ares, whereas Atossa doesn't have any connection with the gods, it would seem, and doesn't understand the nature and the will of the gods. So who does that make more scary? These Amazons, who are almost a kind of corruption of the divine, or they've got some kind of uncomfortable close connection with the Greek gods, or is it Atossa who's just so far away from the gods? Perhaps they would have found Atossa more kind of awful because she's got no connection, but maybe less threatening. Then we come to intelligence. I think, again, Atossa's very limited in terms of her intelligence. She's very passive. She's responding to events. She hasn't influenced them. She hasn't created any cunning plans or anything along those lines, unlike Penthesilea and Hippolyta, who are probably quite smart. And then, when we compare both of them to Medea, they pale into insignificance in terms of her sort of formidable and what's described as a kind of openly masculine intelligence. Good. There's all sorts of other things that you could have done, I'm sure, but those are just some of the ideas that you would think about if and when you write an essay. Lovely. So, moving. So, what I would like to do now is have a look at the messenger speech in which he talks about the Persian dead at the Battle of Salamis. This is often called first messenger speech, although you probably wouldn't need to know that. There are 4 messenger speeches in total. So the first one is the Persian dead, the second one is the actual events of the Battle of Salamis, the third one is the fighting on the island, and the fourth one is the retreat back to Persia. So if we say first messenger speech, third, fourth, if you see that in notes or in sources, then that's what they are referring to. So the questions to consider: what is the immediate literary impact of the messenger's depiction of the Persian dead? So describing them, who they are, the words used, the way it's all put forward. And the second question I want you to consider is, what's the structural impact of the list of Persian dead? So really, how does this fit in with other lists or other parts of the play? So pause the video, DVD, whatever it is you want to call it, and have a go at answering this question on paper. Jot down some useful notes for 10 minutes or so. Well, actually, maybe less, 8 minutes. Okay, so a couple of themes that will allow you to answer this in terms of literary impact, and I'm sure you've got most of these, but we'll go through some of the key ones. So when looking at this description of individual dead, there's certainly the debate over whether this is about sympathy or celebration. Now remember, sympathy is not such a ridiculous idea, because sympathy is an important part of tragedy. And remember, this is a Greek tragedy, however strange and unusual and atypical it is. On the other hand, perhaps we're just being too kind, too modern, too rigid in our understanding of what tragedy is, and that this is simply about a celebration of Athenian victory over Persian/barbarian dead. So are we creating a situation of sympathy with the suffering, with the very vivid depiction of how they died and what's happening to their bodies? And remember, these bodies are remaining unburied, they're washing around at sea, so that's a very important thing from a Greek perspective in terms of arousing sympathy or horror, or perhaps even excessive schadenfreude, the joy at someone else's misfortune. Now, this being tragedy and literature, there's no reason why actually it couldn't be a complex bit of both. We're supposed to feel some sympathy for the Persians, but also celebrate their ultimate defeat. So that's obviously done through, as we said before, the depiction of them as individuals. If you're just looking at the meaningless, faceless mass of water, when you go back to all those liquid metaphors of flowing and pouring, the victory doesn't feel as complete, and the suffering doesn't seem as real. The other thing that the mention of all these individuals does is remind you of the size and scale of the Persian army. So just listing a lot of individuals creates that sense of mass. Remember where the individuals are from creates that sense of people from everywhere attacking Greece. So Egyptian names, Persian names, Bactrian names, Lydian names, Cilician names. So these are all places that sort of surround the Greek world from the east, if you like. So by reminding you that there were Egyptians, there were Persians, there were Bactrians, there were Lydians, again, you're reminding the audience the size and scale of the army, and thus the glory of their victory. And as Edith Hall pointed out in her video, remember the way you pronounce these names could also create that kind of sense of the exotic and the barbaric. The other thing that we see from this passage is a bit of a reinforcement of the softness of barbarians. So even though, yes, they've been killed and it's all a bit horrible, there is this sense that they are these light, delicate flowers, and they are bruised by bashing against the rocks, even though they're dead. One of them is famously described as handsome, his handsome face. So, perhaps again, this emphasis on the Persians and their softness and their devotion to sort of youthful beauty rather than hard, tough masculinity. There's even a Persian who dies with an airy leap, which is a slightly kind of ridiculous, effeminate sort of prancing sort of leap off a boat when he's been stabbed with a spear. Slightly sort of, again, ridiculous, excessive Persian death. One could argue, and again, you can flip it round and say this is all about suffering and sympathy, and this is a reminder to the Athenians not to be tyrannical because these are the consequences. There's all sorts of arguments and counter arguments. By all means, choose your own. So I think this does also show the consequence of hubris in a flawed political system. So we're being reminded of the suffering and the cost of having an irrational, tyrannical overlord who suddenly decides to do these crazy and excessive things on a whim. Now, in terms of structure, these lists echo the list at the beginning and the list at the end. So the play is almost structured in a sense in reference to these three lists. We've got the list at the beginning of all the Persians who are missing. We've got the list in the middle where we see what's happened to them, and then we've got the list at the end where their fate is reported in relation to Xerxes. So it's a kind of this repetition of lists. It has some very similar effects to, in a structural sense, as to what it does have in an individual sense. So, you know, size, celebration, sympathy, all that sort of stuff. Good. So what I would like you to do now is have a look at the depiction of the Battle of Salamis itself, and this is going to be again another 10-minute task. Why did the Athenians win the Battle of Salamis? So yes, you'll need to think about strategy and tactics. You may also need to think about motivations and other concepts. So this is the second messenger speech, the Battle of Salamis, and what I would like you to do is select 10 quotes from the text and explain why those quotes are relevant to your answer of why did the Athenians win. So stop the PowerPoint and have a go at that for 10 minutes or so. This is a crucial passage, so make sure you read it and do it properly. Good. So there are certainly a few other bits and bobs that you could pick out, but my 10 would be at the very start, the Persians say some malignant power encouraged Xerxes to attack, and this again reminds us that the gods are on the Greek side. This is something the Persians understand at this point. Perhaps they didn't understand it before, but certainly the gods, and a whole variety of gods, are fighting for Athens. So remember, this idea of the gods keeping Athens safe is echoed in Atossa's speech. We'll see it later on where Xerxes says Ares was fighting on their side. It's a pretty kind of constant idea at this point, i.e. after the battle, the Persians seem to have worked it out. The other reason why the Athenians win is trickery and leadership. So this is not explicitly revealed, perhaps, but it's pretty clear that when we hear the phrase Helene told this tale and Xerxes attacked on the basis of that, that is the trick of Themistocles, who sends his slave Sicinius to trick Xerxes into attacking early, or rather attacking at all, because he believes the Greeks are fleeing. So again, we've got the cunningness of the Greeks versus the simplicity and impetuosity of the Persians led by Xerxes. Now, the other thing Xerxes does that, again, ties into leadership instead of motivation is he threatens to cut the heads off anyone who sort of underperforms or retreats or doesn't do their duty. So here we see again, the Persians are fighting for fear, fighting out of fear, and the Greeks, as we'll see, are fighting for more noble reasons, for freedom, for the gods, for the oikos. Now, when the Persians are rowing up and down all night to stop the Greeks escaping, they're exhausted, and then the Greeks appear, and the Persians realize that they're not this force in disarray. They are unified, strong, and ready to go, and thus fear gripped every man. So again, we're seeing the kind of cowardly nature of the Persians. So the Greeks attack, and here we see some classic quotes: single pulse and precise order. This is how the Greek attack is described. So we're looking at unity and discipline and order and all those kind of classical Greek ideas against the sort of Persian chaos and disunity, certainly within battle. I think it's perfectly right to look at the way that the Greeks are never politically united, especially in Herodotus. What you'll often find is once a battle starts, there is this great sense of unity amongst the combatants. There are obviously exceptions, the Thebans at Thermopylae, but perhaps with that one exception aside, the Greeks do tend to show great unity in battle once it started. So again, the next crucial thing is the Greek motivations for fighting, or rather the Athenian motivations for fighting. They're fighting for freedom for their wives, i.e. their oikos, and their family and their legitimacy, for the tombs of their ancestors, so the heritage of their city and polis, and oikos, and then temples. So the gods, they are fighting for the gods and to avenge the wrongs the Persians did them by burning down the temple and the Acropolis. This would have been what's hammering through any Athenian's mind. So we've got the ridiculous motivations of fear versus some truly noble motivations, and this surely is why the Athenians won. In terms of unity, we've got this further kind of dynamic where the Greeks cry out in one voice, and then the Persians respond with and there's that sort of clear speech about protecting your freedom, your wives, your tombs, your temples, and motivations. And then the Persians respond with a manifold clamour. So there isn't really a responding speech. It's just this kind of hubbub of different languages, different opinions. There isn't that kind of precise single goal or leader who is actually there driving them onwards. When we look at the battle itself, and again, very similar to Herodotus, we have a Hellene charging first. So a Greek person starts the battle, and this probably points to Greek bravery. It's a tough time, but the Greeks, or a Greek, decided to attack first, and that caused the whole battle to be started. Now, once the battle is underway, the Persians initially resist because of their weight of numbers, but then they collapse and the numbers become a huge issue. Our ships were jammed in hundreds. So the Persian ships are kind of rammed together and there's nothing they can do to defend themselves. So they're helplessly slaughtered by the Athenians and the other Greeks. So here we see the size and scale of the Persian fleet is causing problems, and one of the reasons why they lose, because their fleet is too big. And their fleet is too big because Xerxes is so hubristic and the Persians believe that size is everything. So they bought too much stuff and it all starts to fall apart. Now, even at this point, the Athenians are still relentlessly aggressive. So the Athenians are taking up bits of broken ore and bits of wrecked ship, and they keep attacking and killing the Persians who are, on the sea, on the wrecks, on that kind of stuff. So we've got this kind of relentless, aggressive manliness from the Athenians, and this sort of cowardly, disunified Persian response. So there we go. Those would be my ideas as to why the Greeks in Aeschylus, well, Athenians really, won the battle of Salamis. So we come on to the next messenger speech, in which he discusses what happened on the island, because he says, well, as if that weren't bad enough, there is a further tragedy, an even greater tragedy perhaps, that's afflicted the Persians, and that is what's happened on the island of Psytalia. So read the next bit. How does the battle on the island characterize the problems with Persian society? So another 10 minutes, stop and have a go. Well done. So I think there's a couple of things raised here. So the battle on the island, in which all of the Persian nobles have been put on one island by Xerxes, shows the folly of being dependent on one man and his decisions. So if the guy leading you is incompetent and rash and hubristic, then you're in real trouble, because he can make really bad decisions that lead to catastrophe. If you've got a democratic process, or at least a process in which there is debate, then normally the right outcome is achieved. Now, perhaps this idea of all the nobles being on the island there just to kill sailors shows, again, a weakness in Persian society. So the nobles, the best men in Persia, aren't brave particularly. They're not keen to fight, and they're not leading their men in battle, unlike the Athenians. famously Themistocles is on one of the warships. Xerxes is on a throne, Mars out at the back, and the Persian nobles are on this island given the very easy, relaxed job of killing washed up, shipwrecked Athenian sailors, or Greek sailors. So it shows that Xerxes is an idiot, Xerxes is hubristic, and that without a kind of sensible democratic system of debate and strategy and leadership, then things are going to go terribly, terribly wrong. It's also an interesting little story because it shows the involvement of hoplites. Now, the battle is very confusingly depicted in Aeschylus because remember, it's a naval battle. So the hoplites weren't really very heavily involved apart from on the island. So by bringing in the island and talking about this battle, Aeschylus is kind of giving everyone in Athens a role in this very important battle. So he's talking about the sailors who win one element of the battle, and then the hoplites, the middle class, the upper middle class members of Athenian society, they win this sort of important battle on the island. So it's a bit about unity, I think, and a bit of politicking from Aeschylus in this story. So after having watched this, Xerxes decides that he is going to run away. He's going to leg it, and it all collapses from here on in. Now, the ship captains who'd survived turned tail and fled. The Persian ship captains who'd survived turned tail and fled. And this leaves the army in the lurch. They've got no supplies, they've got no transport, they've got no chance. All they can do is walk back to Persia and try not to die. And on this huge journey, the land basically turns against them. The land is kind of rejecting them like an infection. And they're tortured by hunger and thirst and exhaustion, and great numbers died. So this is a long march of starving, thirsty, exhausted soldiers, almost all of whom die before they get back to Persia for a variety of reasons, some through their own mistakes or just hunger and thirst, but others through tricks of the gods that are just trying to expel them from Greek land. And here we see the river Strymon, and again it says some god awoke winter. They still don't quite understand the nature of the gods. So a river freezes, which allows the Persians to cross it in summer, and they think, oh, this is amazing, great, brilliant. The gods must be on our side. So they all leg it onto the ice, and then the god goes surprise and melts the ice and drowns many hundreds of thousands of Persians. So the gods are really on the Greek side, and they're sort of setting up traps and tricks for the Persians to fall into, because they've committed all these great hubristic crimes against the Greeks. So just to finish, what I would like you to have a look at now is The Barbarian in Aeschylus by Sharon Mitchell from Exeter University. So I'll put the link up, and as always, have a watch through, jot down the key ideas that Mitchell makes, and in your notes, make sure you've clearly used Mitchell's name, because you'll need to quote her in your essays if you use the quotes. If you just say some academic says, well, you're going to struggle with the mark scheme a bit. So you need to have an accurate representation of what Mitchell says and know that it was Mitchell who said it. Good. Okay, so that is basically that. So that's if you do it properly, that should be quite a long lesson. Yes. Anyway, I will leave it there. So hopefully I will see you in the next lesson. Take care, guys.